This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Shalom Aleichem. We're continuing in the Iggeres HaMussar of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And until now, he was speaking about the great power and force of the imagination and how the intellect really is not a match for the imagination unless somehow someone is able to raise the ideas that he has in his mind to the level of emotion. And that was Rabbi Yisrael's great teaching and principle of the importance of learning Mussar, but not just as a study, but in an emotional way, with Sfasayim Dolkim, Rayoin Nachain, Tzior Rachav, and so forth. Now, Rabbi Yisrael says, B'chol hadvarim v'ha'inyanim, in all matters and in all subjects, Yesh klal uprat, there are generalities and there are details. Everything in the world can be broken up into generalities and details. Oisugi umini v'ishi, either general categories or individual categories. Imein klal ein prat. If we don't understand the general principle, we can't understand the details. For example, in my edition, I have actually an English translation that was translated by Rabbi Tzvi Miller. He brings an example that there are general categories. A category would be, let's say, a mammal, and there would be various animals in that general category. So you could have the general category is a mammal, basically an animal that nourishes their young with milk produced by glands. But if you didn't know what a mammal was, it would be impossible to understand or explain what a human being is, what a cow is, what a horse is, and so forth. So whatever exists in the generality exists in the detail. So, for example, whatever, if we don't understand the generality, we can't understand the details. Because all the details have the quality of the generality, meaning all the various animals will have the traits of being a mammal. However, but there could be a generality without the qualities of the details. In other words, all the details will have the quality of the klal. So whether it's a cow, whether it's a horse, whether it's a human, whether it's a chimpanzee, they will all have the qualities of the generality, namely mammal. But the general category mammal will not necessarily have the details of humans, of chimpanzees, and so forth. In other words, there are general categories in this world and there are details. All the details will have the quality of the generality, but the generality will not necessarily have the qualities of all the details. Ki ein biprat elamash v'klal. There is not in the details only what's in the generality. Achin yesh klal af be'ein prat mutzes. However, there are a generality without the specific qualities of that detail. Ay lazois. Well, having said that, reishes kol davar hu haklal. The start of any discipline, any study, any subject is the generality. And from then, the details will flow. In other words, whenever you pursue something, the study of any topic, you first have to know the general principles, and then you could study the details. Because if you first get caught up in the details, you're not really going to understand the underlying thematic foundation of what this detail is based upon. So that's just a general introduction with which Rabbi Yisrael begins, and this is a very famous, poetic introduction. Everything in this world has klalim and pratim. Ein, if there's no klal, there's no prat, but there is a klal, even though they don't have the details of the prat. Fine. So now, regarding our issue in the subject at hand, namely Avodas Hashem, we need to know, before we start studying, which shoe to put on first. Before we start studying, whether Asher Yatzar Nalakai Neshama are Bracha Smucha L'Chaverta, before we start studying how to take 3 steps back, before we start studying what bracha to make on a piece of cake and all the various myriad of details that we spend our life studying. We need to know the generality upon what is predicated the entire Torah. What is the foundational principle of the Torah? Ata nashkifna ba'avadasenu. Now we have to consider our service, HaMussar, that we are obligated, L'bareinu Yisbarach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Haloi davarhu. Isn't it certainly necessary? Mahu haklal. What is the general principle? Asher mimenu nishav hapratim, from which all the details flow. Rav Goldberg gives an example. How does Mesilas Yesharim begin? Klal chayvas adam ba'ilamai. Before we could get into the various specifics of the different branches of Avodas Hashem, be it carefulness, be it alacrity, be it cleanliness, be it separation, the first thing we need to know is what is the foundational principle upon which everything is based, and that is klal chayvas adam ba'ilamai, man's obligation in this world. So what is the foundational principle upon which all Avodas Hashem is based? Says Rabbi Yisrael, beli das ubeli tvuna, without much knowledge, without much contemplation, nakir, we could recognize Sheho Amuna, that the belief, Hamarachefes Banu, that's already floating within us. In other words, the foundational principle is not even something that requires great analysis. It's a truth that's already, it's in here, it's already floating around in our head. And that is Shoheloikim Shoifedhu. God is a judge, Laseis La'ish, to give man kefri ma'alalav, in accordance with his actions. Meaning, the foundational principle of the Torah, according to Rabbi Yisrael, is the concept of reward and punishment. And this is not something that needs analysis, it's not something that needs much study. It's sort of ingrained within our consciousness that if God created the world and we have responsibilities, there has to be a system of reward and punishment, otherwise life is arbitrary. That is the foundational principle of the Torah. That Imra V'Amar Darkoi, if a person's path is evil and bitter, Yivasar Ba'inashim Rabim, he'll be rebuked and punished with bad punishment. V'Im Ba'olam Hazeh, whether in this world, Oy Ba'olam Haba, or in the next world, Hanitzchi, which is eternal, which Bal Yeda Eno Sharka, nobody could estimate its value, its power. In other words, in this world, we have a way of measuring pain and discomfort. The next world, we have no way to estimate it. Ad kama tigda lamala roish be'echos v'kamos. How powerful, great, awesome in magnitude, in quality and quantity, the world to come is. We can't measure how hot and painful and long the punishment is. And on the flip side, v'imzach v'im yashar paleh, if a person's way is pure and straight, lu'umasai baruch ye'omar, corresponding to how good one is, they will be blessed. B'ta'anugim nisam ba'il mazeh, in wondrous delights in this world, and more so in the world to come. B'iden nifla lamala harbe, with wondrous delights above and beyond our ability to grasp. Lamala harbe misecha v'har geshanushi, above and beyond man's ability to grasp. This principle of reward and punishment, that if a person does not keep the Torah, there are severe and serious repercussions in this world and the next world. And if a person does observe the Torah, there are magnificent rewards in store. Ba'il mazeh va'il maba. He reishis mitzadenu la'avaydasai yisbarach is first base of Judaism. First base of Avodas Hashem is a clear conviction in the ramifications of one's actions, that there are reward and punishment. Hu mamar Chazal. This is what Chazal say, and I believe that we all misinterpret a very famous statement of Chazal, including myself, where the Gemara says at the end of Makos, Ba Chavakuk v'hamidan alachas, that Chavakuk came along and he established the Torah on one principle, namely v'tzadik be'emunasa yichya, that the whole Torah is predicated on one foundation, that tzaddik lives with his emunah. So I think I hazily and cloudily and unclearly understand that to mean the foundational principle of Judaism is that there's a God. No, says Rabbi Yisrael, that's not what it means. the foundational principle of Judaism is there's a God who's a shofet, who rewards for every good deed, action, thought, inclination, and there is a God, the same God, the one God, who punishes for improper activity. Umamer Chazal say, Al kein yomru hamoishlim bayu cheshbain. Therefore the rulers say, come to the city of Cheshbain, which we learn to means hamoishlim, who are the rulers, elu hamoishlim beyitzram. Those who rule their Yetzer Hara, what do they say? Bayu cheshbain, give an accounting. Bayu unechashev cheshbain oishalaylam, come and make a calculation in the world. Hefseid mitzvah keneged schara. You're not comfortable doing the mitzvah. It's not easy to get up early for davening. It's not easy to dedicate time for learning. It's not easy to behave during davening. It's not easy to speak gently to your family and friends. It's not easy to control your temper. Okay, that might be the case, but what about the great reward that's in store if you do the right thing? Or uschar avera. Yeah, maybe you're going to feel good momentarily by sinning, keneged efseida, but what about the loss? Step one in Judaism is to make an accounting. It's not easy doing the mitzvah, but the reward is infinite, so it's not rocket science what you need to do. It's not easy refraining from the Avera, but the punishment is for sure not worth it. And therefore, what do we need to do? This is the foundational principle of Judaism, reward and punishment. Having clearly in front of our eyes the repercussions for our actions. The only problem is, to our great detriment, we don't think about it. The most obvious principle in Judaism is barely ever on our minds. And we could daily, hourly sin, even though somehow we know their punishment, we just somehow ignore it, like Rabbi Saul said, imagination. And despite knowing the great reward for mitzvahs, we don't live in accordance with that. And that is what Rabbi Saul will continue to elaborate on, the deep psychology of man. And probably of all the Sifrei Mussar, Rabbi Yisrael dug in the deepest to the subconscious and to the inner dynamics of human emotion and psychology to really get to the bottom of it, of how the Yetzer Hara abuses us. Okay, thanks everyone for listening. We will pick it up, Be'ezus Hashem, tomorrow. Okay, Kol Tov everyone.
Okay, thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.